Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for that introduction. What I'm going to talk about this morning, it will get you halfway to where you will get to at the end if you come and listen to my session on Tuesday afternoon in the Easter stream, because there are two parts to this this activity of getting our students to really deliver to their absolute limits of their capability. By the way, I should just mention that the Rolls-Royce I used to work for was the aerospace jet engine company, not the car one. I remember listening to one of my colleagues, a senior colleague, who used to travel on Eastern Airlines when it existed, and he was traveling up at the front of the aircraft, and one of the cabin crew came up to him and said, "Oh, sir, I do love your cars." And he said to her, "We don't make cars." "Oh, what do you make?" "Well, if you look out of the window, out there, hanging under the wing, that's what we make, jet engines." "Oh, I never knew that." Anyway, so I used to be in jet engines side, and I worked in a lot of different parts of the organisation, and it kind of helps to sort of give me the background for the things we were discussing yesterday and touched on a bit this morning about interdisciplinarity. Because I worked in almost all of the divisions or the parts of the organisation other than the hardcore manufacturing side. That's one area I never got to work in. But I learnt lots and lots of different languages, the languages of each of the business areas, marketing, sales, commercial, finance, systems analysis. That's where I started. And it's this kind of the Janus, the God who faces both ways, who can understand both languages, which is so important to all of our students when we work in the field of informatics and computer science. They have to be able to understand both the languages, the jargons of computing, and the languages and jargons, the interdisciplinarity of the different parts of the businesses, who probably can't even talk to each other because they don't recognize the differences in the meanings, the semantics, the languages. And that's what we're talking about today, or this week. Now, as part of this whole game of getting the best from our students, we have to understand them. On Tuesday, I'll talk a little bit about the difference between academic as fount of all knowledge and the academic as mentor and guide. I'm going to be talking about some of the aspects of being the mentor and the guide, understanding our students. Which is why I provocatively entitled this session, Celebrating Difference and the Other. And these two words, or two phrases, come from sociology, you may recognize. And it's deliberately provocative because so often we are required to, by modern political correctness, to treat our students as all being the same. But that isn't actually very true. We've got these imperatives on all of our universities. We've got to deal with diversity. Often that means the difference between the social classes and poverty and poor students and wealthy students, brilliant students, and so on. In the UK, we're being driven towards students being able to negotiate their assessments with their tutor. We're moving away from here is the standard topic, and you will all write the same, essentially, essay about something. We want them to be able to influence the topic. We have pressures on internationalization of curricula and assessment because we get more and more overseas students. In the UK, we're being driven towards widening participation to the 55% or more who've never been involved in universities, whose parents never went to university. And in the UK, for certain, and I think it's probably the same here, we have a problem that students who are black, minority, ethnic, and international students tend to get quite a lot lower grades than our white Caucasian students quite often. And in the UK, it can be 15–20% difference. And we're being driven to reduce that quite rightly. Interestingly, since I started teaching in the University of Derby in 2002 or thereabouts, from within a year or so of that, looking back through the data, I found that my modules had very, very low, if any, BMI deficit. And some of what I'm going to talk about today, and I will talk about on Tuesday, is how I go about doing that. The fundamental the basis of what I do, and some of my colleagues do as well, is to accept that every single student is unique. Every human is unique. We have different genetics, we have different experiences, and we are different day by day as we learn. I today here am a different person slightly from the person I was yesterday or 5 years ago. And this is an incredibly important point to remember as we interact with our students. Here I have 3 pictures. Students in a university in New York, in the center of it. The central one, international students in the University of Oxford in England. And the third one is a very diverse group in Brooklyn. We are unique. I remember when one of my daughters was quite young, she had 2 friends. They were identical twins, genetically. And yet, by the time they were 12 or 13, there was already 3 or 4 inches difference in height between those 2 girls. And even today, they look quite different in some respects. Even if our genetics are the same, we are different. We're different because we see and hear and touch and feel and think different things. So how do we harness that in the way that we go about teaching our students, in mentoring and guiding them? Now, one of the interesting things certainly I see in the UK is a degree of political correctness about how we should interact with our students. What are the acceptable questions that we can ask them about themselves? There are various taboos, but I have never liked to follow rules or follow taboos all my life. I like to question them. Why? What happens if I don't follow them? What happens if I break these taboos? Because they can help affect how we interact with our students to understand exactly who and what they are, so that we can ask them the questions that lead them to a really interesting insight about the topic of their assessment. Just take a look at that photo there. 4 students, different ethnicities, probably different religions. One can guess at it. You can't be entirely certain, but I would guess the lady on the left is probably Muslim, and the person on the right is probably a young Sikh, but I'm not sure of that. I wouldn't make that assumption. I would ask. And then you have probably the tutor, the second. Now the question I ask you is, would you, in your teaching environments, ask any of those 5 people, about their background? And if you don't think you would do that, my challenge to you is, why not? Why won't you ask them about their background, about their interests? Why might you want to ask them about that? Because there are significant consequences if you do ask them. Almost all of the consequences are positive for the student if you do it the right way. Yeah, there might be a small downside risk to you personally if you don't handle it the right way and they go and raise a formal complaint. I have never had a formal complaint about me about asking some of these questions. Other colleagues are, Richard, don't go there. Now, outside of academia, in my daily life, or in your daily life, gentlemen, you are welcome to answer the question, would you compliment any one of those three ladies there about that headscarf? Any? Who would? Who would go along and say to any of those three ladies, wow, that's a beautiful headscarf? Have any of you ever done it? One. Gentlemen, the others of you, why haven't you done that? Are you scared that they might react badly? Professor Marlowe, what's the response?
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Every single one of them will say, thank you very much. Wow, you've made my day. Ladies, would you say anything to the gentleman in the middle? Have any of you ever said anything like that? I have. Wow, thank you. Or the lady on the left, that magical rainbow hair colour. She would love to be noticed and congratulated. Why don't we do it more often? In many of our universities, which are predominantly white Caucasian, if I look around, there's quite a good number of white Caucasian lecturers here. There are others, some black, and so on. Would you ever ask your students in any of those ethnicities, where do you come from? Excellent! And the result is what?
Hard to shut them up all.
Yeah. I mean, when I get Sub-Saharan Africans coming, you know, I can recognize that from their names. I will also probably open the conversation. Which part of the world, which part of Africa does your name come from? Do you come from Nigeria or South Africa? Because I recognize the name patterns a bit. Mostly I get it right, but that gives an entry into how are you going to personalize your assignment? Are you going to go back? If I know now that they have come from Africa, from Nigeria, for their degree, I will ask them, are you going to go back to Africa, to Nigeria, when you finished your degree, undergraduate or postgraduate? Because you can then say, are you going to answer this question in the ordinary sort of European way, or are you going to identify an insight that you can take back with you home that's relevant to the industry sector or the topic as it is now capable of being done in Nigeria? Because what you can do in Nigeria is different from what you can do in the USA or the UK. I remember talking to a colleague at a SAS Global Forum a few years ago, and he was from a very, very successful postgraduate program using SAS and so on. And he aimed to get all of his students from overseas to stay in the USA. And I asked him, surely, shouldn't you be encouraging them to learn as much as possible and to take that back to benefit your country? But we are too frightened much of the time to ask about their origins. And sadly, we're going to lose some amazing insights that we as academics can learn from them. If we set the right assessments, by the way, folks, we will be learning all the time from the work our students do for us. You've got 20 students in a class, that's 20 perspectives that you haven't got time to develop. You can learn from them. So we should be using where they come from, their background. And I don't mind whether it's ethnicity or social class. You can learn an enormous amount if you can guide and enthuse your students to go into their background, because their background may be different from perceived wisdom, perceived theories, perceived practice. Do you ever ask your disabled students, whatever the disability is, about how that will affect the insights they can bring in their critical analysis in the topics you set them. A wide range of disabilities are there. Do you ever talk about the students' disabilities with them to learn who they are? You do. You and I are great. Not great, sorry, wrong word. We are alike, and it's fascinating. Why don't you ask your students about all of these things which make them individually unique, with unique perspectives and insights? Or learning disabilities. We have more and more dyslexia and dyscalculia and so on students. I remember when I used to teach down in Southern Africa for quite a few years, we were doing a partnership program with a university in Botswana. And I happened to be in Botswana at the time of the program validation meeting. And one of my colleagues from Derby, because we were having an online sort of discussion, video conference, asked the Botswana academics, as part of the regulatory process, what do you do, or how do you handle students with dyslexia? Because in the UK, they get extra time for exams and so on and so forth. And the academics in Botswana said, what's dyslexia? We don't have any dyslexia in Botswana. Because they don't test for it. It's just, you're a student. But it has, again, all of these problems, potential problems for students, again provides, particularly in the field of computer science and the application of computer science, these sort of things have some really interesting consequences on how the students think, how they work, how they interact with us. So shouldn't I be asking them about it? Because that's going to help them, because I can help them to ask the right questions about the topic. It might be to do with AI, machine learning. And we've got a PhD student at the moment who's semi-blind. He's doing some work on character recognition, handwriting recognition in the field of mathematics, because you've got lots of symbols which are kind of complicated. And he is doing this project because it is about him, about himself. So, are all of these types of questions about ethnicity, diversity, language, and, are they truly taboo? Do we feel that they are taboo? What should we be doing ourselves to challenge these taboos and learn how to do it in a way that does not cause offense, does not cause those students to place formal complaints against us? I can do it face to face. I will not do it for online teaching, because I cannot see their reaction if it's on keyboard. I don't know how they are responding. There is only one taboo that I have not yet broken. I have not asked any student on the LGBTQ, etc. Side, because I don't know quite how to broach that. However, I had a brainwave, or a colleague triggered a brainwave. We have a lanyard with our university pass. And we also have, at the university, we have several different ones for different colleges and so on. We also have the rainbow lanyard. I've not used that so far, because I thought, I don't want to indicate I'm pro. However, I thought, actually, no, I can use it backwards. If I'm wearing it, maybe one or two students will ask me, and then I can ask them about the T question. Because those people who are trans, were male, now female, were female, now male, they, I think, may have some extraordinary insights. Having been one, now the other. They can see life from two gender perspectives. That might be really interesting, particularly in the field of computing, because computing is really designed around systems for kind of upper middle class, affluent, white males. That's what most things seem to be. So getting into the LGBTQ sort of thought processes might be utterly fascinating and might give us some interesting clues that we should bring back into businesses about how they look at designing the systems. What is it we really want? Not just because the sort of stuff we get today, we can do it, therefore we will do it, irrespective of ethics and so on. But here is some real input, because we get all we can, if we do it carefully, responsibly, we can get amazing insights. Using this approach, in my first year, I got an astonishing piece of work from a mature student, and this was about AI, ultimately the artificial general intelligence perspective. In less than 1,500 words, he produced the most beautiful piece of thematic critical analysis I have ever seen from anybody. No academic I have ever written has produced a short thematic analysis with such clarity as this guy did, with 50 plus citations, 50 plus references for a 1,500 word article. I'll be putting this presentation up online, one of those URLs that you saw on the front page, and you'll be able to get it, actually get hold of it if you want to use it with your students to teach them what thematic analysis is about. I just encouraged him to find a topic. But in terms of personalization, here's a few examples of what happened when I started asking students very personal questions. A young lady, well, not so young, she was, I don't know, in her mid-20s, late 20s perhaps, from Iran, female, Muslim. And she came up with a new IoT-based service, a sensor service, about that topic. A new biomedical sensor to monitor uterus and cervix condition and functions. And I thought, really? Wow, that's an interesting thing to come up with. Is it safe for you if you're planning to go back to Iran? And she said, yeah, no problem at all. And we then developed the ideas. Or automatic sensory lighting for autism. That guy was the father of a fairly difficult autistic child. The next one's not so controversial, but it's about understanding and having a dialogue with your students. This was a Gulf States guy, probably mid-20s, late 20s. He wanted to do something interesting for his great passion. He was a bike rider, a biker, Harley Davidsons indeed. And so he came up with this idea of using some sort of GPS-y sort of based system to provide an app for Harley Davidson riders worldwide, so that when they go from one country to another or one part of the USA to another, they can find a local group. Personalization based on his personal interests. This last one, the bottom one, was particularly interesting. This is autumn last year. A very retiring, quiet character. And in the workshops, he didn't seem to be getting on very much. He didn't seem to be doing too much. So about week 3, week 4, I went and spent about 20 minutes with him, finding out why wasn't he kind of making progress. Hadn't he had any ideas for this topic about a new IoT sensor-based service that could be useful to people? And so we got right down to the basics. What's your interests? And it turned out while he was at school, He was a great swimmer. But then he said, but since I've come to university, I've not been swimming at all. Oh, I said, well, look, you know a lot about it. Why don't you think about using that to find an interesting topic that you can come up with an idea for your assessment? So I left him with that. Next week, go along, have another chat with him, right into the depths of his personality. Oh, by the way, he was also dyslexic, which didn't help matters too much. And he said to me, Richard, I had a great idea. This is it. Wonderful, brilliant. Now you can go and develop that. But the key thing was interesting. He then said, oh, and by the way, I've started swimming again. 18 months or more from school, he'd not swum. Now he'd got something, he's going back to what he loved. And he changed. Because I had delved into his personality. So, are your students achieving their maximum potential? Because if you do get them to do that, you will not have a BMEI deficit in grading. Because you're treating each student as an individual. They're not a number, they're not a student, the student body. They are Richard, Jane, whoever. And you can help to improve their achievement quite dramatically. And in doing that mentoring, inspiration, and guidance, are you letting any taboos, political correctness, limit your interaction with your students so that they aren't able to achieve their maximum potential? Thank you.